This year, I participated in the Gamemaker Toolkit Gamejam and created a game in only 48 hours. It was my second ever game jam and my first time ever solo working on a game jam. What you're seeing right now is gameplay of the game that I made, Tower Drunkfence, a tower defense game where you recruit hungover dwarves from the medical tent and bring them beer in order to keep them happy, otherwise they'll quit and go back to the tavern to drink. It was styled after old Flash games from a decade ago, which was, 1, because I played them so much in high school, and 2, because my art skills are horrendously lacking. The theme for this game jam was out of control, and of course, Tower Drunkfence wasn't my first idea. My game jam started out with going through a long time trying to break down the theme and come up with ideas of how to incorporate this into something. Going into the jam, I purposefully went without an idea of what to create, choosing to think of something during the jam itself. The first game I tried making was based around a name for a game that popped into my head, which was Grave Robert. This developed into the idea of raising skeletons from graves and then needing to capture them to add to your undead army. If you didn't capture them in time, they would begin to move around to the other graves and raise skeletons themselves, who would in turn raise more and more. I got to the stage where I created the base of the gameplay, but after playing it, well, it just didn't feel very fun, to put it plainly. So, it was back to the drawing board. I came up with an idea about how instead of the player not being in control, but instead taking control away from the game might be an interesting way to go at this. My first idea that I was drawing up was a fight where the computer would display its actions to the player, and they would be able to manipulate it somehow in order to make it some more favorable version of the fight. This eventually transformed into a platformer that would have a display of the different manipulations of aspects like speed, gravity, jump height, and other things like that. After thinking about the maps that I would need to make and the logistics of making something that would be actively fighting against you predictively, I decided it was too much work and ditched that idea. By this point, it was about 6 hours after the start of the jam, and I wasn't really enjoying it that much, and shifted more into some silly idea that I could have more fun with, and that idea was a bunch of hungover dwarves you gotta booze up to work for you. With an art style based around Flash games that I played in high school instead of doing work, I set out with my perfect idea in mind that I had. Within half an hour, I had the basics of the mechanics and was able to grab dwarves and place them around, and I was enjoying just that basic part of it. I continued working on it for a while, and I had never made a tower defense game before, so I didn't know how to get basic things like enemies moving around working. So for the sake of simplicity, I just made a couple of flags to place on a static map instead of coding in some sort of road thing, along with a long switch statement to say, move to this flag, then move to the next one. The step after that was making the dwarves actually fire at the enemies, and my solution to this was bullets. There were a lot of problems with those bullets, and the main one being losing the target once the enemy was killed. I spent maybe an hour trying to fix them before finally scrapping the idea, deciding it was too much of a hassle. That ended day 1 of my game jam. Day 2 of the jam was a bit more like day 2 and 3, meaning that I didn't actually sleep from now until submitting my game. The day started out with undoing work on the bullets that I had done last night and making sure that it worked properly. Then I went on to make a plan for all of the things that I would need to do. First up was art. With having zero experience making art, I knew that my game would wind up looking like a Flash game from 2010. So instead of being upset about that, I decided to fully embrace it. A bat was the first thing that I made. My game needed an enemy going through the map, and bats were the perfect thing. The tavern and medical tent came up next with the idea of staying true to that drawing in the style of 2010. They were simply some flat sprite on the screen lacking any sort of depth. Creating the dwarves and the player's character came next. I began with the base of the model out of just some random colors and went to giving it some sort of character. This whole process was a lot more difficult than I had expected it to be. Getting it to look right was something I spent a lot of time doing. And then the player was simply just a recolored version of the dwarf with some extra stuff added onto it. The map was a very simple thing to do. With a plain background, a basic brick feature, and level design, the map was divided up to require the player to place dwarves in unkey locations, because they could simply just provide upkeep to dwarves that are right beside the tavern. Collision was added to the player so they could not go into the roads, and new pathing for the bats was added to fit with the map. Next up was the part that I had a lot of fun with. The voice lines. It was a lot of fun coming up with just silly little things to say, and I think it added a fun touch. 4%? Does it come with an umbrella too? I made a small life counter and a counter to tell you how much beer they had left, so you don't go too much over it. Finally, it came down to the most difficult part for me, the music. I have no idea what music theory is, and I don't really listen to music myself, so this was an absolute mess. I tried making something that sounded kind of drunk and wacky, and I have no idea if I really did that, but here's the result. If you want to skip it, here's the time to skip to, which I probably recommend since it's so horrendous. Otherwise, here it is. Honestly, I had a ton of fun making this song. It was a new experience for me, and getting to hear something you made is cool. I made a mechanic for upgrades, since it felt like it was a bit lacking in something, with the currency being something simple. Making coins was a given, seeing as you're a bartender. Adding in the change so that you're paid more depending on how far the dwarf is, now allowed me to remove those unfun waterways blocking the prime locations out. With this change, the prime locations becomes deficient in coins for upgrades, meaning the player would have to make a decision between easy and fast dwarf beer delivery and money for upgrades. With all that entered and working, I felt that anything more I added at this point wouldn't improve the base of the game, and I was happy with what I had made, so it was time to wrap it up in the package of title screens. I made a quick little help guide that you can bring up at any point, and I was actually pretty happy with this. It did its purpose, and I felt it was really well integrated. Then a help screen, and then a loss screen, and finally the title screen. With this, it was now time to submit it and leave it to the gods of itch.io. Now it's time for some personal ratings of my game. I feel like this game is a solid 5 out of 10. I didn't have the best idea for the game, and of course, my art and music weren't very good. Some of the things that I could have done better personally on was instead of trying to get an idea out and beginning making it, instead taking a lot more time to fully develop and flesh out an idea. With the amount of participants so high, I got into my own head about making something that would stand out instead of just making something that I would have fun with. Luckily, I wound up having something that I just had a lot of fun making. I could have spent a lot more time on the art, and the biggest point that I would like to improve on in the overall gameplay, in all honesty, is the game boils down to running between point A and B over and over and over. This could have been improved in other ways, like maybe a conveyor belt of beers to at least change where you're ultimately going. Some thoughts on the game jam as a whole would be that I just didn't spend enough time on my idea. Working with a team, or at least one other person, would have made it a lot easier. 48 hours is not enough time for me to work on something alone. Some people can do it fine, but I need a lot more time to make something. At the time of this recording, there have been 90,000 different ratings on the games, meaning an average about 40 ratings per game. My game, however, is downloadable only and has 10 downloads and 8 ratings. To get more ratings, I would have to release it as a web version, because from what I can see, that's what gets the most. However, the license for Gamemaker for this is $100 US, and I didn't want to spend that on a game jam. If you have the option for this, definitely take it. Overall, I would say that it was a great experience, and I'll definitely be participating in a lot more game jams. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like, take a look at my game. I've left a link in the description. Hope you enjoy it.